Joining us on the phone to take a look at what's going on statewide, our good friend Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Doing really well. We had what we called a socially distanced barbecue this weekend, and what that consisted of was a friend of mine who is just a great cook, and we've all got the buddy who loves to fire up the pit and get the barbecue going, have a cigar, have a drink, and that sort of thing. But we haven't been able to do that, so his idea was just I'm going to cook a bunch of racks of ribs and just give them out to people. Just come by the house and grab them.
Hey, there you go.
So we did that.
There you go.
Oh man, that was also breakfast again this morning.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
That was okay.
Nothing wrong with that at all. Let's see, where do we start? Let's start, I guess, with the governor. Last week, it was silence all of last week, which kind of surprised me, to be completely honest with you, Scott, that, we're not even having one press conference last week. Today, the governor has a press conference at 2 p.m. Yep. What is expected from the governor today? It's
been, I think, 2 weeks to the day since we've had a press conference from the governor. You remember he talked on May 4th, which was 2 Mondays ago, and we expect the governor to talk about what kind of regulations we now live under. Some of those fitness buffs who are already at the gym early this morning, those were allowed to be opened under the last announcement. We expect to hear some things about what kind of guidelines there should be for people who are working in offices, et cetera. But more businesses opening up across Texas, and we may be surprised. Remember, 2 weeks ago, I don't even know that some folks very close to the governor knew that he was going to go ahead and open hair salons and barber shops and all of that, so we could see some surprises at 2 o'clock.
I saw a story earlier that El Paso has said, hey, let us do our own thing. Are there any other cities or counties that are trying to get the governor to, I guess, hand back a little bit of control to them?
There are certainly local leaders around the state, particularly in Dallas County, Harris County, Bexar County, Travis County, El Paso, which you mentioned, and probably some others who don't agree with the approach of the governor. I haven't seen an outright request that way from any others, but I think there's going to continue to be some push and pull between the local governments and the governor, which, of course, has become our pattern since 2015. When he took office, right out of the gate, he made it one of his priorities to take more power from local entities over all sorts of things, and this just plays right into all of that. Of course, this creates confusion, as we've talked about here on the show, for people out there who are in these communities and who are everywhere. I mean, in Amarillo, for example, where they have had this huge outbreak, and this, of course, contributing to the biggest one-day spike since all this started, which was reported on Saturday. We had about 1,800 cases of COVID-19 that were reported on Saturday. Now, the governor's office and others have said that's partially because of the increased testing that we're doing now all across the state, but also because of this outbreak in the Panhandle there, centered in the Amarillo area, where there were 700 cases reported.
Yeah, the meatpacking facilities,
mm-hmm.
and that's where the state has finally gone in and in at least one case, Scott, they had to convince the plants to let them do testing.
Yeah, and so there have been these fights, and there have been arguments about how to get all this done. I can understand that for local leadership, they may be frustrated that the governor goes on television and says his stay-at-home orders are lifted and people are not required to wear masks and all of that. And in the meantime, Ginger Nelson, the mayor in Amarillo, had said that the governor, in a private conversation with her, which she reiterated in a Facebook message, I think a couple of weeks ago, when this first became apparent that Amarillo is a hot spot, that the governor in the private conversation said, you need to tell your folks to stay home. So those local leaders can't craft or tailor a specific plan for their area, but they can do their best to try to encourage people to follow certain guidelines.
Scott, what do you think about this? I had read yesterday that now the state is including antibody test into the case counts. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that, in a way, kind of screw up if we're comparing numbers going back to last week, we're on this, 7-day trend or whatever it may be. Doesn't that kind of screw up the numbers a little bit?
doesn't give you an apples-to-apples comparison, does it? It may make things look a little better than just depending on how you slice and dice those numbers, may look better or worse.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's the problem with all of these numbers, Chad. Unless people put them in real context, for example, my friend reporter Jeremy Wallace, who does the Texas Take podcast with me, which you can download on iTunes or however you enjoy your podcast, he always likes to really put these things in context and say, look, we're up for these 3 days, and this may be 3 days that are the worst 3 days since all this started, or we may be down and in the numbers, and here's what that means. But the numbers without any context and some real clear idea of exactly who's sick. One of the problems that we've run into as media in trying to report all this is that the state has been very slow to release demographic information about folks who have come down with COVID-19, whether it's the reported cases or the deaths. And so people had kept asking the question, well, is this because of people in these meatpacking facilities, or is it because of people at nursing homes or assisted living facilities? That's all important information as we try to figure out and wrap our minds around what exactly is happening here, rather than just saying, oh, here are some raw numbers.
Yeah, it's not that, we don't care about the people in the meatpacking facility. It's not that we don't care about the folks who are in the nursing homes, but it paints a better picture. And it can also, honestly, calm some people down or make them hyper-vigilant when it comes to nursing homes, when it comes to, dairy and meatpacking facilities, that these are the places where you have to use extreme caution when you're around, instead of when you're just going out to the beach. You're probably going to be okay.
Right. The better the information is, the better decisions people are all going to make. No question.
One industry that really, to me, has not been talked about enough, bars. The fact that restaurants can be open right now, bars cannot be open. We've started to see a little bit of a pushback from some bar owners that have said, hey, we've been waiting enough. It should not take this long to get a decision from the governor.
Yeah, they were frustrated, and on Friday night, the bars on 6th Street, for example, here in Austin, got some attention for doing a soft opening, and I think this was happening in some other places around the state. This group, the Texas Bar and Nightclub Alliance, had encouraged their members, which, hundreds of bars all over the state, to go ahead and do a soft reopening. They said that it would not include patrons or the general public, but businesses needed to remove all the boards from their windows, turn on the lights, and have a DJ, have some live music if they wanted to, just to get going again. And I think, Chad, part of this is the frustration over two things. One, the bars probably don't think that there's a whole lot of difference between the way they operate and a restaurant operates. In Texas, the legal distinction between a bar and a restaurant is that the bar, their sales come from more than 50% 51% of their sales to their customers. And so they feel that they could do the social distancing just like a restaurant. They feel that they could be at 25% just like a restaurant. And why not be open? Either do it for, do it for everybody or do it for no one. It frustrates people when, this is across industries, when there's a rule for some folks but it doesn't apply to others. And then, of course, the other frustration is that, when hair salons were supposedly not allowed to be open, there was one case that got a lot of attention that we've talked about a lot here, the Shelley Luther case in Dallas, where there were some legal gymnastics done by the governor's office and others to try to undo the rules for that industry when you did have hair salons and barbershops closed all over Texas following what they thought the rules were.
Yeah. And I guess, for hair salon owners and barbers that are out there, now they can be open. And also many of the cases, because there were many more than just her who were, who were written up and fined and everything else. So a lot of those cases are now being dismissed.
Yeah, at least 200 cases against these salons and barbershops have been dismissed by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. It helps to answer a question, a little better answers it, that you asked last week, Chad, which was, even if somebody can't be jailed for violating these orders, which was, the quick legal gymnastics I talked about, they basically busted Shelley Luther out of the Dallas County Jail. The question you asked was, well, can't they still lose their license? And apparently they can't. And this is really fascinating and I think unprecedented, Chad. The governor, in his revised order, had publicized the fact, when he issued that new order, he said, and I think he tweeted out and did some interviews where he talked about the fact that people could no longer be jailed for violating his orders. That part was well known. The part that was not well known, and this was the reading of it by the agency, the TDLR folks, they said that the way the governor changed his order meant that it was retroactive, that the that the hair salons and the barbershops did not need to close going back to April 2nd. So think about that for a second. You, across this entire state of 254 counties, 29 million people, 2 time zones, there were how many? I mean, we can't even imagine how many barbers and salons were closed under what they thought was a lawful order that said they had to be closed, only to later find out that the governor's going to change it, like get in a time machine retroactively and say, by the way, no, you never had to be closed going back to April 2nd. I can't imagine, as a business owner, Chad, how angry I would be about that. How much revenue did they lose out on, only to have the governor come back in and say, oh, you know what, not only could you not go to jail, I never meant for you to even be closed. I think a lot of folks are going to find that outrageous.
Well, and if I'm a bar owner, and let's say today I don't get an answer from the governor, I have to I have to really think hard and go, okay, if they're not gonna jail people, and if they're not gonna fine people, now he hasn't said a word about the bar industry, but there's now precedent, regarding his order. I would think that if I were a bar owner and I'm on day, 68 or so of not being open and not being able to bring in any money whatsoever, I might just be willing to roll the dice and say, screw it, I'm opening.
The precedent, which you laid out, is pretty clear. If you go ahead and open anyway, the governor is not only going to say that you don't have to, worry about your license or anything like that. The precedent is the governor would go back and say that you never had to be closed in the first place. And I think if business owners are looking at potentially going out of business, not being able to pay their employees, and those families, who rely on that income, are going hungry and having to go to the food bank, I might roll the dice on going ahead and opening up. Yeah.
And again, I'm no lawyer, but you could probably hire a really good one who could interpret it that same way.
Well, I don't even play a lawyer on the radio, but that's what has been happening.
Yeah. Let's see. Before we sign off today, Scott, campaigns are finally starting to get going here in Texas.
Sort of starting to get going. I have heard of at least a couple of Texas House candidates who are block walking again. One of them here in the Austin area, one Republican who is looking to try to take back a seat from a Democrat in the fall, although there is a Republican primary runoff there. The runoffs are on July 14th, as you know, so we have some time before that. But candidates, not too many candidates block walking that I've heard of.
Yeah, I was about to say that'd be...
Well, there are a lot of people who are not really interested in having anybody show up at their house knocking on the door, and so that is hindering a lot of the campaigns. But I've heard a lot about campaigns, for example, ramping up their text messaging, which is interesting, Chad. Usually when you get a text message from a campaign, it's maybe something you screenshot and you tweet it out because it's kind of annoying or funny, but a lot of folks are sitting around with nothing to do, and they'll get these text messages from campaigns, and they'll start interacting with them. And interestingly, for some of these candidates, and by the way, their response rates on those texts have gone up. From what I understand, usually it's very low. Around 3% of people would ever respond to one of those texts they get from a campaign, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. But I've heard of those response rates going up to 7 or 8%, which doesn't sound huge, but it is a decent number compared to 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
And the ones that are having success with it, by the way, are the candidates who are asking people, do you need anything? Do you need help, filing your unemployment insurance? Do you need help, in getting food or anything like that? Rather than making it all about the candidate, they're trying to make it about the voter. How about that?
Yeah. I'm sorry for laughing. I'm just picturing somebody there who's been sitting around, no one's contacting them. Finally, they get a text from a campaign. They're just like, yes. Finally, someone cares.
Sure, I'll talk to these people. Why not?
Yeah. Scott, what are you guys following over at Quorum Report today?
we will see if there are any surprises out of this announcement from Governor Abbott. It's coming our way at about 2 o'clock this afternoon. People can sign up. If you don't want to sit there and just monitor it yourself, we'll send you all the real news out of it. Sign up for our free email alerts there at quorumreport.com. You can sign up for a subscription by going to quorumreport.com and click subscriptions. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. That's Scott Braddock, editor of quorumreport.com. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.